The film opens with a mysterious man calling into a late-night show called Ghost Radio to share a terrifying story from his past. However, refusing to reveal his real identity, he keeps his name hidden as he begins recounting the horrifying events that changed his life forever. The story opens with a couple, Win and his pregnant wife Pat, arriving to inspect a new house. The real estate agent explains that despite how massive the property is, they are getting it for an unbelievably cheap price. As Pat walks upstairs to look around, something in the house across the street suddenly catches her attention, and just then, she notices something on the floor. Deep scratch marks carved into the floor. Looking even closer, she notices a broken fingernail stuck between the cracks. But the agent suddenly says the previous owner used to have a dog. Eventually, the couple decides to buy the house. The salesperson tells them that the residents highly value privacy, which is why every house is hidden behind tall walls, and neighbors never interfere in each other's lives. Only shared space is the trash bin near the entrance. Before leaving, the agent warns them not to create noise or disturbances. A few days later, the couple brings a monk to cleanse the house before moving in. Moments after he walks upstairs, the house suddenly falls silent. After a while, the monk returns downstairs, coughing violently, then leaves without saying a word. Win asks Pat to wait a bit longer before moving in, since the house is still being renovated, and the dust would be unsafe for the baby. The next day, one of the installer asks Win whether he has experienced anything strange with the house across the street. Win says no, so the worker explains that while they had been waiting outside, smoking cigarettes, an elderly woman across the street made a horrifying expression before screaming at them to get away from the house. Win assumes she was probably angry because they were smoking, but another installer quietly says the woman felt deeply unsettling. After the installers leave, Win notices a security guard sitting alone near the street, eating something. Feeling bad for him, Win brings over some food and tells him to sit comfortably and eat properly. But the moment he gets closer, he suddenly realizes nobody is there. Turning around, he suddenly comes face to face with the old woman. He politely says he just moved in. However, the woman angrily storms back into her house without saying anything. That night, while speaking to Pat over a video call, Win mentions the strange old woman, saying she seems completely insane. Pat asks him to show her, so Win switches to the back camera, revealing the old woman is performing some kind of disturbing ritual dance. She says they should stop spying on the creepy old lady, when the woman suddenly points directly at Win, and he quickly stumbles backward. Concerned, Pat asks what happened, but as Win switches the camera around, a shadowy figure can briefly be seen standing silently behind him. However, Win brushes it off and claims he only bumped into the bedside table. A few days later, Pat finally moves into the house, and wanting to surprise her, Win reveals the baby's room he prepared for their future child. The emotional moment causes Win to open up about his past. He explains that ever since he was born, he never truly had a home. His mother constantly moved from one rented apartment to another, and even now, the place she lives in still does not belong to them. But this house, according to Win, is finally theirs. The following morning, Pat walks outside to throw garbage into the shared trash bin, when another hand suddenly grabs hers. But looking up, she sees a woman standing there. Later, Pat excitedly tells Win that she spoke to the neighbor. She says the woman was beautiful, kind, and only looked slightly older than her. The neighbor even gave her a fruitcake. She then asks whether it's really okay to interact with the neighbors, and Win says it's probably fine if they are friendly, although he still feels uneasy about the old woman across the street. Wanting answers, Win contacts the real estate agent and asks whether he can speak with the previous owner of the house. The agent says he would first need permission before sharing any information. Win explains that he wants to know whether the previous owners ever experienced problems with the old woman living across the street. He also asks about the security guard who keeps appearing outside their home, before mysteriously vanishing. The agent promises to ask around. However, regarding the security guard, he suggests contacting the village office or head of the security directly. Soon after, Win visits the security office and explains everything he has witnessed. The guard, Semarang, listens carefully before revealing that a security guard once died in his sleep near Wynn's house. Ever since then, villagers claimed they could hear the sound of a bicycle bell ringing throughout the neighborhood. The haunting became so terrifying that rituals were performed to help the spirit move on and be reborn. But the ghost refused to leave. At the same time, Pat notices the figure of a security guard silently standing outside their house. Meanwhile, Semarang explains that everything only became peaceful after the old woman across the street, Sompit, started leaving offerings outside to calm the spirit. Wynn immediately says that he still hears the bell outside his own house, and Semarang warns him not to interfere with Sompit's rituals. Otherwise, he refuses to take responsibility for whatever happens next. Annoyed and frustrated, Wynn storms back and angrily throws the offerings into the trash bin. However, one of the items does not move. Then, the sound of a bicycle bell echoes nearby. Refusing to give up, Wynn tries again when the trash bin suddenly shuts on its own, and the bicycle bell rings once more. And this time, the guard appears. Despite this, he keeps pulling at the object until he finally rips it free, causing the security guard to instantly vanish. Shaken, Wynn tries to calm himself, but Sompit arrives and screams in horror after seeing what he has done. She asks why he interfered with the offerings, but Wynn runs away. And just then, Sompit gets terrified, seeing a woman quietly peeking out from behind the door. The next day, Pat tells Wynn that she invited the neighbor over for dinner, and says she's definitely coming. While they are watching TV, Pat suddenly stands up and throws the remote at Wynn, making his nose bleed. Shocked, she asks why he's bleeding so much, while a confused Wynn asks why she threw the remote at his face. Pat accuses him of being a jerk to her, but Wynn says she is probably just experiencing mood swings, and leaves there. Later, Pat is chopping vegetables, completely lost in thought, while the sink overflows beside her. Wynn quickly turns off the tap and asks where her mind is. As he cleans the sink, he notices strands of hair floating in it. Confused, he pulls at them, but the sink strainer comes out too. Curious, he looks inside the drain and suddenly sees an eye staring back at him. Just then, Pat is about to hurt herself, but he quickly stops her. Shaking, Pat cries that she doesn't know what's wrong with her and begs for help, to which Wynn calms her down, tells her she's just tired, and asks her to go rest. Later that night, strands of hair slowly hang above the sleeping Wynn. He thinks it's Pat, but is terrified to realize she is asleep beside him. He looks up and is horrified to see a ghostly woman standing upside down above him. The ghost suddenly jumps on him, and in the very next moment, he sees Pat above him instead. Terrified, he shoves her off the bed, and Pat, crying in pain, asks what is wrong with him. That evening, the neighbor arrives, and Pat goes to open the door, but no one is outside. However, when she returns, she is shocked to find the neighbor already sitting at the table with Wynn. And suddenly, the woman begins shaking violently. Pat nervously says she hopes the food suits her taste, but the neighbor starts eating as if she hasn't eaten in ages. Moments later, she spits blood into the bowl, and Pat is horrified to see her teeth breaking and falling out. Suddenly, Wynn also becomes possessed and terrified. Pat watches as the ghostly woman twists her head and starts advancing toward her. At the same moment, Pat starts bleeding and her fetus falls out. Slipping in the blood, she crashes to the floor as the ghost crawls toward her and begins devouring the fetus. The next instant, the ghost lunges at her and Pat suddenly wakes up, but Wynn is strangling her in a possessed state. Pat struggles free and kicks him away. Panicked, she checks on her baby, and as Wynn tries to calm her down, she points a pair of scissors at him, warning him not to come closer. After calming down, Pat says the house is haunted. Wynn reveals that his mother called earlier and told him the monk who performed the blessing ritual has died. He also says the security guard is not human, and that black magic objects were found planted outside their house. Wynn believes the old woman across the street is behind it because she never wanted them there. But Pat says she doesn't think a person did this. She takes Wynn to the neighboring house and discovers that the snacks she had been leaving there are still hanging on the gate, now covered in insects. They rush back home to check the fruitcake and are horrified to find worms crawling inside it. Shaken, Pat realizes the neighbor was never human. Wynn calls Semarang and asks if anyone lives in the house next door, and Semarang tells him that no one has lived there for years. When Win asks if he knows anything about it, Semarang reveals that a woman once hanged herself there, and by the time people discovered her body, it had already rotted. Terrified, Pat says they cannot stay in the house anymore, but Win refuses to leave, insisting it is his house. Pat tries to walk away, but Win grabs her by the hair, causing her to slap him. She then tells him to get a grip, to which he breaks down and apologizes, begging her not to leave him. Pat pleads with him to leave with her, but Win stubbornly says he is staying because this is their home. After Pat leaves, Win notices two ghostly figures standing silently inside the house. The sight alone sends him into a panic, but before he can react, he freezes in terror. Hanging right above him is the rotting corpse of that same woman. Pat suddenly calls out to him, and the ghost whispers, "Stay together." Terrified beyond control, Win bolts out of the house, and the two immediately drive away in fear. A year later, Win decides to return to the house. Before moving back, his mother hires a spiritual advisor to perform an exorcism to drive away the evil spirits and installs CCTV cameras around the property. Win's mother tells them that the spiritual advisor buried sacred objects around the house to protect them from evil spirits. Pat hires a nanny named Toei to help take care of the baby. One day, Toei notices the woman next door staring at her through the window. Just then, she spots a cat perched nearby. Thinking nothing of it, she goes after the cat to catch it, but it suddenly leaps off the wall. As Toei is climbing down, a ghostly hand slowly grabs hold of her, instantly possessing her. Later, Pat sees Toei happily playing with Prim, but suddenly, a nearby door slowly creaks open on its own, and a toy car rolls out from the darkness. Then, Toei's voice suddenly sounds strange, and as Pat turns around, she sees the ghost of the woman instead of Toei. The ghost tells her to go out, but in the very next moment, Toei is back again. The next day, Toei comments on Pat's large breasts, and Pat says it's probably because she has a child. Toei asks if her breasts will grow too once she has kids, saying Win would definitely like that. She even asks if Pat and Win sleep together often, which irritates Pat and makes her walk away angrily. That night, when Win returns from his work trip, Toei tries to seduce him, and for a brief moment, he almost gives in. However, Pat calls out to him just in time, bringing him back to his senses. Later that night, they suddenly hear someone screaming outside the house. Alarmed, they rush out to see what happened, only to discover Toei lying unconscious on the back lawn. They quickly call Toei's girlfriend, Ploy, for help. After checking on Toei, she warns them that the house is filled with dark energy. She says the symptoms look exactly like someone being possessed by a female spirit. Then, she reveals that she can actually see ghosts herself. At that exact moment, Toei suddenly regains consciousness, but something feels horribly wrong. She violently shoves Ploy aside, then she charges straight at Pat, but Win stops her, and during the violent struggle, he accidentally drives the scissors into Toei's neck. Toei drops to her knees, but instead of collapsing, she begins stabbing herself over and over again in a horrifying frenzy. Ploy quickly begins chanting powerful mantras, causing Toei to violently tremble and scream in pain. And after a long, tense moment, the evil spirit is finally forced out of her body. After that incident, Pat returns to her mother's house with Prim. Win's friends decide to throw a small party at the house, and after a while, they realize that one of their friends, Bank, never came back after going out to pee. Win finds Bank on the lawn and nervously tells him to get inside, but Bank insists Win should go first and says he will follow. When Win returns to the others, he is shocked to see that Bank is already inside. Panicked, he asks his friends if they can leave early, and they insist on staying a little longer. But ignoring them, Win forces everyone to leave the house. The following week, Win visits Pat's mother's house to celebrate Prim's birthday. Later that night, Pat tells Win that he should sell the house, but Win replies that the house is more than just a building to him. He reminds Pat of the day he proposed to her and the promise he made to her mother, to become the best head of the family. He says that if something unknown is threatening their family, he cannot just run away from it. No matter whether it's a person or a ghost, he is determined to fight because he refuses to be a failure. Pat then says where he chooses to live and what he decides. She will stand by his side no matter what. When Win returns home, Semarang asks if he has made a new key yet. Confused, Win asks why, and Semarang says he saw him climbing into his own house the other night. Win calls Pat and tells her that nothing seems to be missing, and Pat says she checked the camera but finds no one entering the house. Just then, the door behind Win slowly creaks open, and he suddenly freezes. Moments later, the door shuts and he snaps back to normal, only to realize he is holding a box in his hands. Inside the box, he finds old family photographs, and behind the frame, he also discovers another hidden photo. And as he looks closer, he notices the same ghostly woman standing in the background of one of the pictures. At that moment, Win receives a call from his friend, who tells him that Bank hasn't shown up to work for 2 days. He asks Win to tell Bank to contact him if he hears from him. Win immediately calls Bank, but he hears Bank's phone ringing nearby. Following the sound outside to the lawn, Win is horrified to find Bank unconscious between his house and the neighboring house. The next morning, Win receives a video call from his boss, who tells him that Bank has regained consciousness. Bank explains that on the night he came to Win's house to play cards, he went upstairs to use the bathroom and, in the neighboring house, saw a beautiful girl in a red dress changing clothes. He secretly watched her for a while, and it seemed like she noticed him. The girl then looked directly at him and invited him to come over, but Win would not let him sleep in his house. The next day, Bank secretly returned to the house to wait for her, which is when Semarang saw him climbing in. Later that night, the girl called him again and told him to climb over the wall into her house. But the moment he entered, he became possessed. Bank reveals that the woman told him that if he wanted to stay with her, he had to throw away a thing from Win's room. It is then revealed that Bank removed the sacred object the spiritual advisor had buried to keep evil spirits away. Just then, a powerful gust of wind suddenly blows through the room, and he sees the neighbor writhing in pain inside her house. Terrified, he tries to hide, but then he watches her suddenly run out of her house, and before he could understand anything, she runs into his house. Moments later, the door to his room slowly creaks open. Distressed, Win sits frozen in fear as the ghost crawls toward him. Unable to move, he watches in horror as it suddenly lunges at him. Meanwhile, Pat repeatedly calls Win, but he never answers. Worried, she opens the CCTV camera app and is horrified to see Win scratching his own face. Then, to her terror, she watches him tie an extension board cord to the ceiling and hang himself. As Win struggles for air, he sees the ghostly woman hanging right in front of him, and suddenly, her head falls off. The security guard saved Win's life, but Win is admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Pat vows to do whatever it takes to help him, and decides to uncover the true origin of the house. She then brings Nu to meet Win, who reveals that he once lived in that house with his sister Nan and his brother-in-law Noom, while helping raise their daughter, Alice, as the couple practiced Dharma and observed religious precepts. During the first few days, No took good care of Alice, and she quickly grew attached to him. But one day, while Nan and Noom were returning home, Alice suddenly disappeared. Nu later found her inside the neighboring house, where Alice claimed a woman had invited her in for a meal. When Win asks if Nu knew anything about that house, he says he knew nothing about it at the time. Just then, Win notices a little girl sitting silently in the corner as Nu continues his story. He says that when he looked up at the balcony, he saw a woman in a red dress smiling down at him. As he tried to bring Alice home, she suddenly vomited dirt and had to be rushed to the hospital. That same night, after returning from the hospital, Noom began drinking heavily before suddenly breaking down in tears. Later, Nu heard strange noises coming from Noom's room, and when he entered, he was horrified to find Noom hanging from the ceiling, while a ghostly woman warned him to sell the house or he and Alice would die next. Shocked, Win asks, "So you sold the house to me?" To which Nu apologizes and explains that even after becoming a monk, the guilt still haunted him. He says he never realized the spirit would continue searching for new victims and repeat the cycle. Nu suggests Win to sell the house, but Win refuses, saying he wants to live there with his family and no longer cares about the ghost. He demands that Nu help him instead. He takes them to Sompet's house and they begs her for her help. Sompet refuses at first, but when Prim cries for help, Sompet's heart melts and she agrees to help them. She prepares Win to confront the ghost, telling him that the candle will temporarily open his third eye and protect him while he uncovers the truth. However, he only has as much time as the candle keeps burning. Win discovers that Noom was having an affair with the woman next door, Nock, and that his wife wanted him to end the relationship. Noom tells Nock that she has to move out because she cannot keep living beside them like this, and he offers to help her sell the house. Nock angrily asks if his wife told him to throw her out, and Noom tells her not to misunderstand the situation, reminding her that she is only his mistress. Furious, Nock accuses Nan of trapping Noom into marriage through pregnancy and stealing him away from her. She claims the house and everything there should have been hers. Noom slaps her and tells her to stop dreaming, but Nock suddenly laughs, then slowly gets up and reveals that she is pregnant. Next, Win sees that Noom has started treating Nock kindly again, but secretly mixes something into her drinking water. Unaware, Nock drinks it without hesitation. She happily asks if he is finally going to divorce Nan, and Noom says yes, promising that she will soon move into his house. Nock says she worked hard to buy her own house, but she no longer cares about it because the house she truly wants is his. Moments later, the substance begins taking effect, and Nock suddenly clutches her stomach in unbearable pain. Soon after, Nan arrives, and Nock starts bleeding heavily. Nan coldly tells Noom he did not give her enough poison and orders him to force more into her mouth. Crying, Noom hesitates and says the baby is his child too. But Nan reminds him that he only has one wife and one family. Nock desperately begs him to stop, but Noom forcibly pours more of the substance into her mouth. Impatient, Nan orders him to get the baby out, and despite breaking down emotionally, Noom violently strikes Nock's stomach, killing the unborn child inside her womb. Noom then returns to Nan, who coldly orders Nock to get out before she drags her out herself. Barely able to move, Nock tries to stand, but the moment she sees her dead fetus, she screams in unbearable agony. Nan then grabs a lamp and viciously strikes her, causing Nock's teeth to shatter and fall from her mouth. The scene then shifts to the night Nock's ghost took revenge. After killing Noom, she throws Nan down from above as well, killing her instantly. However, Sompit manages to save Nu from the ghost's wrath. The ghost suddenly appears beside Win, but Sompit enters the room, and the scene abruptly cuts away. When he comes back to his senses, he tells Nu that he saw what Noom and Nan did to that woman. He says it was so cruel, and asks Sompit is there a way to send her away peacefully? Sompit says she must enter the house and perform a ritual to free the spirit, but the ghost's rage and desire for vengeance are far too powerful for her to handle alone. Win asks if there is any other way, and Sompit silently shakes her head, but Pat says she knows someone who can help them. They bring Ploy to help them, but before the ritual begins, Sompit warns that they may not be able to defeat Nock, and there is a chance none of them will make it out of the house alive. Pat tells Ploy that the choice is hers to make, but Ploy says she has already decided. She says she wants to do something to help Toei, so she is staying with them. Sompit warns them that they must all be prepared for whatever happens, because if they fail, it means they will all die, including Alice and Prim. They finally enter the house, and Sompit tells everyone to hold hands tightly and never let go, no matter what happens. Then she instructs them to close their eyes and not open them until she says so. She leads them deeper into the house, and meanwhile, Prim hears Win calling out to her. Eventually, they reach the room where Nock hanged herself, but the ghost tricks them by mimicking Sompit's voice and telling them to open their eyes. The ghost drags Nu away, but Win quickly grabs him, while Sompit throws holy water at the spirit, forcing it back, at least for the moment. Meanwhile, the ghost tricks Prim into stepping outside the protection circle. Sompit summons the ghost of the security guard and orders him to enter the room first. She then places a sacred object on the floor, after which everyone enters the room. While chanting a mantra, Sompit slams a dagger into the floor and declares that the ritual will be performed there. Meanwhile, Prim follows Win's voice, but screams in terror and collapses the moment she sees the ghost. Sompit begins the ritual, but suddenly, the sacred objects burst into flames, and the security guard starts choking. Shocked, Sompit realizes the ritual has failed. She says the two spirits are bound together by karma, and asks why no one told her the truth. Moments later, the security guard's ghost crumbles into ashes, and to everyone's horror, Sompit is suddenly beheaded, while the ghost declares that everyone in the house will die. Chloe regains her composure and begins chanting mantras. For a brief moment, everything falls completely silent, and soon after, Nock's spirit appears before them. Chloe says this is their chance, and they quickly rise to complete the ritual. On her command, they pull the strings, binding Nock's spirit in place. Meanwhile, the ghost mimics Win's voice to lure them outside, but Pat quickly brings Prim back into the protection circle. On the other hand, Nock's spirit possesses Nu, throws Ploy aside, grabs a knife, and charges at Win. He barely manages to dodge the attacks, and as Nu lunges again, Ploy steps in front of him and starts chanting mantras, trying to force the spirit out of his body. But Nock's spirit violently throws Ploy into a wall. Ignoring Win, the ghost turns toward Ploy, and as Ploy struggles helplessly, Nock scratches her face. Desperate to stop her, Win grabs a sacred object and stabs it directly into Nock. Enraged, the spirit screams, "Why?" But Win immediately runs out of the room. He rushes toward the front door, trying to escape the house. But before he can open the door, something suddenly drags him backward. And to his horror, he realizes he is trapped in Nock's grasp. Then, Nock's body suddenly explodes before the scene abruptly cuts away. The next morning, Win returns home, and shortly after, Pat arrives with Prim. Prim happily runs upstairs to see her father. But when Pat follows her, she is horrified to find Win strangling their daughter. Prim runs into another room, locking the door behind her. Win orders Pat to get out of the house, but Pat instead locks herself inside a room. In a flashback, the scattered remains of Nock's body slowly begin pulling themselves back together. A short while later, when the door opens, standing there is a grotesque sight beyond imagination. Nock and Win fused together into one horrifying body, their flesh unnaturally merged. It is then revealed that before Pat entered his life, Win was deeply in love with Nock, and Win promised her that one day he would buy that very house for them. They vowed that no matter what happened, they would always stay together. But one day, everything shattered. Win planned to surprise her with a marriage proposal, only to be horrified when he catches her having sex with her boss. He soon learns that, because of that relationship, she was promoted to become the secretary to the head of sales. Consumed by rage and heartbreak, Win sends the video of Nock and her boss to everyone in the office, publicly humiliating her. Back in the present, the possessed Win violently tries to break into the room, but Pat grabs a pencil and viciously stabs it into his hand. She quickly rushes out, tries to escape, but Win grabs hold of her leg. Terrified, Pat kicks him hard in the face and gets the time to rush inside the room and slams the door shut again. Win finally manages to smash his way into the room and immediately lunges toward Pat and Prim like a wild animal. Terrified, Pat desperately tries to remind him that they are his wife and daughter. But through Win's body, Nock says they are not his real family. Pat struggles to hold him back while Win opened the balcony door. And a second later, Win violently shoves Pat out there as well. Then, Win grabs Prim and tries to throw her, but Pat manages to pull her daughter back. At that exact moment, flashes of Prim's childhood memories suddenly begin flooding Win's mind. He comes back to his senses, and overcome with emotion and guilt, he tightly hugs Pat and Prim. With tears in his eyes, Win tells Pat to hold their child tightly for him. Then, without warning, he suddenly pushes both Pat and Prim off the balcony. Nock's ghost instantly lunges toward them, but Win tightly embraces Nock and apologizes for everything he did to her in the past. He then hears Prim crying out and looking toward his wife and daughter. Win shouts, "You are my real family, and I will always be with you forever." Nock softly whispers for him to come back and live together with her in their home forever. And when Win sees Pat carrying Prim away from the cursed house, he finally makes his decision. Knowing the only way to save his family is to stay behind, Win chooses to sacrifice himself and face Nock alone. It is then revealed that No survived that horrifying night, and the mysterious caller sharing the terrifying story on Ghost Radio was actually him. Win is still trapped inside that very house, and every time he tries to leave, Knock's spirit stops him from escaping. Ploy also survived the horrifying night, and Pat is determined to do whatever it takes to free Win from that cursed house. That's it for today's recap. If you liked it, hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for more.